Oh, we are not worthy. We are not worthy.
Double gentlemen. Oh, double. You guys too much. You guys too much.
Thank you for
Welcome
coming
back.
back, Brad. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
not
for coming
signing that
back.
contract
Thank you.
for that other show that was desperate to get hold of you and that offered you all these allurements and promises of fame
Incentivization.
and grandeur and you said no.
No.
I just couldn't let you guys down, regardless of the fact that the conditions and the pay was going to be really good.
Pain and conditions.
Pain and conditions, did he say?
Pain
Did
and
he say?
conditions. No, I didn't. I wish I did. No, pain and conditions is better than pay and conditions.
It's good to be back, gentlemen. Thanks for you guys did a wonderful show. I watched it through the week. I caught up. You guys did a great job on that Gary Moore record. I love that record. It's fantastic. So there's a lot of live performing on that. It's raw and absolutely rocks. So blues power, I call that album.
Does
blues
too.
It was a great show, and we've got some good views and some great comments on there from some good friends that follow us. And just to keep you guys in the loop with a couple of things, Brad and I and the Rock Professor may, during the next couple of weeks, do a midweek bro down show, and we'll get Brad on for a quick half hour, and he can go through his rankings rather than sit there laboriously typing his comments and his ranks in the chat.
Them all in.
Yeah. We're not going to let him do that.
I know Derek Clacton commented about doing that, and I thought, well, we're going to have to do a show just for Derek. Yeah, we're going to have to do it just for him.
No problem. We can do that. So a couple of things, guys. So obviously, we're glad that Brad ditched that other show for fame and fortune for us. We'll always be eternally grateful for the pain, of enduring us. May God bless you for that, bro.
May God's blessing keep you always.
Yes.
May your wishes all come true.
I'm blushing, gentlemen. Thank you. Appreciate that.
There's a couple of things that we want to talk about, obviously, folks. We're going to be doing a shout-out soon. We'll get Brad to do the beginning shout-out, and the Rock Professor will do the end shout-out for you guys. There's a couple of things that we want to talk about. So you may have noticed one of the first comments we put in the chat was, and we didn't advertise it, but we will after, if you're watching on replay. This is part 1 of part 2. Now, you guys know that we like yakety yak on this show. The show's about yakety yak, and sometimes our introductions could go 45 minutes. So we decided between the three of us that maybe we should spread the show over 2, because the Beatles always brings out a long conversation from the three of us. And rightly so, Simon.
Rightly so. Greatest band ever. Just saying. I don't think that's very common.
No arguments there, Simon. There's no arguments at all from anyone.
Well, it depends on your preference. But I do feel as though they changed the face of pop music in a way that no other band did, and took it to areas that, bands are still following now. And I say on this show sometimes, the Beatles were underrated. I still think they're underrated, really, as for their influence and what they did, and an extraordinary creative 8 years that they have. Extraordinary, the growth, sort of, and the change, and the change reflected in the times as well. They were in at the zeitgeist of the late 60s and reflected that fantastically, and took it to amazing places. And in the words of the great Tom Petty, the future was wide open, and so it was.
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah. So Brad's going to lead the show, folks. He picked the album, so he's going to offer a presentation, and then we're going to spend some time, obviously, talking about this album before we actually get into the rankings. So even though we're only doing side 1, and the idea is to spread, the idea is to knock this show off in an hour and a half. maybe 2 hours.
Well, let's
Don't
just
be
wait and
surprised if you're here 4 hours later.
Yeah, yeah. Don't be surprised.
No, we won't endure you through too much torture. We'll get to the point as quickly as possible. But it's a mammoth task taking on any Beatles record, and I forgot how big a task it is until this week. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've tackled Mount Everest again, because every time we tackle a Beatles record, it's bigger than Ben-Hur for me. So I am going to lean on
less chariots.
I've done a whole week of putting in hours and hours and hours of preparation for this show, and I still feel like the information I've got is inadequate. So I'm going to be leaning on you gentlemen as well to be trying to fill the gaps wherever I fall over, because like you keep saying, Andrew, we're not experts. We're just fans, and there's big things that happen with the Beatles leading to each record and throughout each record and stuff. And if I miss anything, gentlemen, jump in and fill those gaps as you guys do very well.
Well, you can't say it all, and that's the thing, though, Brad. You can't, because the information now that's out there, Simon, on the Beatles, the amount of books. And there's some darn good stuff now out there. Will mean a 5-hour show, Brad, just doing the intro. Going through doing a literature review on what's out there. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And so if anybody from the Beatles groups that are watching us, because I've shared the link on some big Beatles groups, we appreciate you joining us. We ask that you subscribe to our channel, and just remember, we are Beatles fans. We're not Beatles experts, and there's a few great YouTube channels out there who can probably lay claim to that label, Simon, of being Beatles experts, and rightly so, because their whole show, Brad and Simon, is just on the Beatles. So you would expect them to know a little bit more. But we're not professing in any way, even though we have the Rock Professor, to be the be-all and end-all of the Beatles. We're just sharing our opinions and our thoughts and stuff that we've picked up, aren't we, Simon?
Yes. I hope people watching who haven't watched this before, the Rock Professor Sobriquet is a purely ironic title.
It's self-appointed. These are self-appointed titles.
The worst kind of self-regarding nonsense. I've got a title and I'm going to use it. I am the Rock Professor, except that if what I say is law.
So that's a point that we like to share with everybody. And obviously, if you have opinions and thoughts, if you are watching, we would love you to put them on the comments. Yeah. If you disagree or agree with our rankings on this album, we don't hold the Beatles as a holy vessel. We don't worship the Beatles. We love the Beatles. We probably do worship the Beatles, but we are kind of serious with our rankings too, folks. If you haven't watched us, if you're watching from these Beatles channels, we are going to be as objective as we possibly can, even though it's pretty hard to be when it's a Beatles album. So we won't say any more about the Beatles. We've got some news that we want to talk about on the channel. So we've got Brad back. We've got some good views on the show that the Rock Professor and I did. And I just want to do a shout out to Shane McGowan from the Pogues. Yeah. Hugely influential band. When I was a young guy in the 80s, I went and saw them in 89. It was a concert that blew my mind. I had a lot of friends that would just socialise Brad, and Rum, Sodomy and the Lash was one of those albums that was always on the background happening. And then they came out with that wonderful Christmas song, which happens to be one of the greatest Christmas songs ever in the 21st century, according to some people, A Fairy Tale in New York, and got more and more fans, So if people don't know some of the deep cuts, they'll know that song, Brad.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Oh, no, completely. Yeah. I mean, it's, really big and influential in that kind of punk folk thing. And there was and is a movement. You know, the Men They Couldn't Hang, but one. But there are other bands that you know, followed in that footsteps and taken that forward as a sort of subgenre of music. It's amazing. Yeah, yeah. I saw him comparatively recently. Actually, last time I saw him was only about, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago. But
Oh, you're lucky.
yeah, he wasn't in good shape. Let's say that. But
Okay.
he still crank out. It was still good. It was still good. They could still crank it out. But yeah, there was a lot of shuffling about rather precariously.
There's some good
on stage.
biographies out on him and also the band, and there's a documentary that came out a couple of years ago that's full of a lot of stars. Johnny Depp is in the documentary, and I recommend it. And Simon and Brad, if you thought that this guy with funny teeth was just this dumb ding-dong from somewhere, he was not a dumb ding-dong from somewhere. He was a very, very smart, onto it guy, like a lot of these artists and songwriters, Simon, you know, and Brad, you know, very smart. Very smart guy, knew what was going on.
And,
Yeah.
yes. From a personal point of view, I was pleased that Bruce Springsteen went to see him when he was in Ireland earlier this year. Went to visit him, which is nice. Very cool.
Fantastic.
The boss.
You want to do a shout out, Brad? You got the chat up?
I do have to chat up. So we have, yes. Did you say chat up or shut up? I can't remember.
No, it's a chat up. Chat up.
Oh,
as
chat up.
Chat up. As in, sorry, yes. Playing with the words.
Yeah. So we have in the chat. There's a few people watching, but there's only a few people chatting at the moment. So I want to say hello to Gretch Zeppelin. Thanks for joining us. We've got Holly Lewis in the chat. Thanks for joining us. Ellen Toll, my mother Ellen, in the chat there. Thanks for joining us again. We have got Simon Williams. Yeah, that bloke we're going to have to block. A troublemaker. And that's all I've got chatting in the chat at the moment, guys. But you know, as we go through and do these rankings, please, if you're watching, give us your rankings. Everyone knows these songs. I'm sure, you know, who doesn't know these Beatles songs? They're magical. So give us your rankings and your, you know, what you think of the songs in the chat, and we'll try and highlight them throughout the show, Andrew.
Awesome. We definitely will do that. So before we do our collective introduction, and obviously, as Brad said, I just want to tack this comment on, you know, feel free to share with us the first time you heard this album. If you did, probably you may have just only heard a couple of songs on the album before you heard the album, Simon, because that's the way it sort of kind of rocked for a lot of people back in the day, didn't it? So, but
yeah,
Brad.
First of all,
yeah.
Well, just want to say, Holly, I'm afraid I have to use a different mug today because my children have nicked yours and used it. So it's in the So I've gone all modern, and this is a synthesizer BTS3 instead.
And I'm using I had to get in theme. I had to get mine.
Oh, excellent.
Good boy. That's the way.
Morning, Johnny Heartbreaker. Hope you're good, man. Good to see you.
So yeah, I mean, this album, I'd heard a few of the tracks off it before I bought the album. I'd heard, you know, the hits off it, plus the singles that were released around the same time. Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out. The album cover, I love the album cover. I absolutely love this album cover. The look of it, it's phenomenal. What they've done with it, it's a great picture. They distorted it from my understanding from the original photo, and that's just how they wanted it. You know, a quick little thing, they didn't put the Beatles' name on the album cover by accident. And they thought, well, you know, the Beatles are big enough now, they don't need their name on the record. So but this album, when I bought it, it was on daily rotation for a long time. I really, really gravitated to this record because, like I'll allude to in my introduction, there's a bit of a change for the Beatles away from the, you know, the poppier sort of driven songs. There was a little bit more introspective sort of stuff going on, and the song writing was changing and becoming more mature. So I gravitated to this record and Revolver, and then Sgt. Pepper's, obviously, and this is a turning point for the band at this point, and I love that. I love that you can hear the difference between, the Help record and this one. There was something quite unique about this record. So how about you, gentlemen? What was the first time or the thing that gravitated you to this record? Andrew?
Thank you for that, Brad. Look, it's a masterpiece of an album, isn't it? And I think there's a couple of things about this album, obviously, that we're going to unite on between the three of us and everybody in the chat, I'm sure. But like a lot of people, I heard a lot of the songs on the radio, Simon, like Paperback Writer, for example. I heard that on the radio when I was a young guy growing up. So I loved the song. And then my first sort of Beatles album, Brad, was that I bought was Beatles for Sale. Then I went and bought the Red and the Blue albums because that was like the greatest hits,
Yep.
So you get, you know what it's like when you're a young guy, you go for the biggest bang for your buck, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You go for the shotgun approach. So I went and grabbed that, and that had a lot of the songs like Michelle and, that we're going to be talking about. And then when I started making a little bit of money, and started getting the records and the albums myself, I think I was probably about 15, Simon, when I actually got the album and then sat it down and listened to it. And then kind of one of the interesting things about this album is that I got it straight away, and as opposed to some other albums that I was listening to that I didn't get. And I'm going to say this respectfully, and that's because it was an album that was made for people like me back in the day, 14, 15, 16-year-old people, that was certainly one of the target audience groups. So the fact that I locked onto it, but I agree with you, Brad. I was familiar with a lot of the songs on Help, and when you listen to the songs on this album, it's like, oh wow, it sounds a lot different. It sounded a lot different, and certainly one of my favorite albums. And I'm glad you mentioned Revolver, because I look at these, and when we've done Revolver, and the three of us have said that we see Revolver and Rubber Soul. I went and watched that show. We all of us said that we see them as a dovetail. You can't enjoy Revolver without listening to Rubber Soul.
Yeah, they could have made a great double album.
Can I just share something with you guys now that came to my mind? Please. I'm sorry to interrupt the flow of the show. But I want to ask you guys now. I was just doing some research this afternoon, and 12 Bar Original, which we've heard, which is on the Anthology album, was apparently going to be put on this album, but they dropped 12 Bar. They never put it on this album. So this is homework for us for next week, and I'll be intrigued to see what you guys would do. Drop one song from Revolver for 12 Bar, and we'll talk about it next week.
Wow.
What's the song you'll drop from Revolver for 12 Bar? Anyway, Brad, one of my favorite albums ever.
I couldn't pick a song to drop from it, Andrew. That's the problem.
That's you're gonna bloody do it. Okay, no, it's just a what if. And getting back to your point before we flick it over to the Rock Professor, I remember talking to a guy years and years ago. His name was Cookie, and Carl and I know him, and Richard Fox knows him. He's the guy that used to work in the local record shop, and he was the wise guy, Simon. He was like the Rock Professor, because that's where the Rock Professor got his Rock Professor credentials from, because the Rock Professor worked in a record shop. Notice the connection here. So there's a really important thing about the record shop dude, Brad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could I say, I was not like the man in High Fidelity, okay? I was not like the High Fidelity man in the slightest.
Good on you. I'm glad. Anyway, I remember he said this profound thing to me. He said, Andrew, when you stop listening to songs and stop chewing your bubble gum and you want to bite the real meat of music, you need to start listening to bands that produce albums. Anybody can come out with a top 10 song, Andrew. Not very many bands can come out with a classic album. And I said, okay, well, give me some examples of perfect albums. And he said, Sticky Fingers. And then I remember the third or fourth choice, because I was a Beatles nut back then, Simon. He said, and Rubber Soul, and then Revolver, and then Abbey Road. It's been complete albums. And that's when I went, oh. So going back to your point, Brad, about this being different from Help. Help had some cool songs on there, didn't it? But
100%.
this is Rock Professor, a complete album, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, and it's kind of the beginning of that transition from singles to albums.
That's true.
It's I think that that up until then, 65, 66, you could argue that the single had been king, and then it's the beginning of this transition to the album being king. And I think that 65 is probably that. I mean, it's got Highway 61 revisited, bringing it all back home to fantastic records. Rubber Soul, Otis Blue, Mr. Tambourine Man by the Byrds. We get to them as a thing. My Generation by the Who, Out of Our Heads. Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds. There's a lot of, you can see that there's this sort of turning into albums and stuff, and looking on that as an art form as well, which is fantastic. So it's and so yes, and I think it's a pivotal album for that in many ways. I think for a thing. I mean, in terms of me listening, see, this isn't a copy, but we had this in my house when I was growing up. I don't know who bought it in my house, but my parents had it. We had Help, Hard Day's Night, and this, and Sergeant Pepper's. We had them in that, so I can remember this from growing up, right? And I wanted to make the point that I was just having a look whilst you were talking, and so Help is the preceding album that was released in August 65, and this is released in December 65. So you can see the kind of the amazing amount of creativity and the speed at which they worked. It reflected in just those dates. 5 months later, I've got another album out, and it's another absolute classic. And it's but also you can tell that it's a real step forward in terms of they're getting into the studio thing instead of the just recording it live and things. There's still quite a lot of that there, but you can see this very much as a transition album. But
hey, Lynette,
I love this record.
Thanks for joining us.
Love this record. Yes, hi Lynette. Hello. Welcome. So yes, I think there's a a transition point that we can talk about. The difference, as they move into new areas and stuff. But the growth is phenomenal, and the change is phenomenal, and I've loved this record since it came out. So I'm old. That's what happens. I can remember playing it in my mum and dad's house, and because it was one of the things we could play on the stereo. Yeah, it's been a part of my life ever since it came out. This is not. I noticed this is not. I don't know if I got. This is not the original version. This is the version I bought in where I worked in the shop, Tony's Records. I don't know if you can see that. Look at that, £2.50.
Wow.
Find a record. So it's just an ordinary copy, but it's not an original copy. So, but I've had it for a long time. That's I've only had that for about 40 years, not 60. Slacker.
Only.
Yeah, only.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, the Beatles, part of my life growing up, part of my, been a part of my life all the way through that. I've loved all of that stuff, as I've said before on here, ever since.
Yeah, I find
They
it.
never get old, and they're underrated.
I find the Beatles are in the background or foreground of most people's lives, including a lot of musicians. And anyone that says they don't like the Beatles, I have a problem with that, because surely there's songs in there that they love. Because, you know, I had this discussion point with someone not long ago that, you know, the Beatles will be remembered in 200 years from now. Some artists won't. And, you know, the nearly 300 or 300 songs that Lennon and McCartney wrote together will go down in history as some of the greatest songs ever written, without a doubt. But, gentlemen, do you guys want to start the review of the album, like the overview, and go through that?
Yeah,
Sounds good.
why not?
All right, so
We're going nearly half an hour.
this is a
start.
mammoth task, guys. This is a mammoth task, like any Beatle album is. Like I said, it's like tackling Mount Everest. Any Beatle album we start. And Holly, you jumped the gun. You've sort of beat me to it, because I was going to say it was released on December 3rd, and that's 58 years ago today here in Australia. So you beat me to it.
You think this show isn't planned?
Yes, that's right. But I will say this: when I picked Rubber Soul, I didn't realize that at the time. I was like, I knew it was coming up, but I had no idea it was December 3rd. So it just fell on the right date here. So Rubber Soul, it's a sixth studio album by the Beatles. Like I said, released on December 3rd, 1965 in the UK on EMI's Polyphone label. And there was, you know, this is in the days of when they used to release singles that weren't on the record. So accompanied by a non-album AA single, Day Tripper, and We Can Work It Out, which I love those songs, which at some point we'll maybe do a ranking of those sort of songs that were you know, album singles. I guess that'd be a cool show. So the Beatles had released 2 albums of new material in 63 and 1964. And in 1965, they faced the challenge of creating another album with limited material and a tight schedule. The recording session for the new album Rubber Soul didn't start until October, the 12th. So John and Paul found themselves needing to generate more than a dozen new songs, a task they admitted was very impossible, for this marked the first time in their careers that they had to force themselves to produce that amount of new material. In the back catalogue of their records previously, they always had songs and whatnot ready in their arsenal to fire at the new record. With George and Ringo, the Beatles had to navigate a series of recording sessions under a very tight time and restraints that they had. The urgency was driven by the need to release the LP by early December. Despite the challenges, Rubber Soul received acclaim both at the time of its release, and it continues to be regarded as a major turning point in the Beatles' career. It's recognized for its high quality production and in its significance in terms of musical composition and recording technique. The irony lies in the initial difficulty perceived in the impossibility of creating a substantial album when the given constraints. Rubber Soul not only met it but exceeded them, proving to be, you know, they were durable and essential platform between pop of Help and experimental ideas of Revolver. So the recording sessions took place over a 4-week period. It's unbelievable when you think about this. 4-week period in October 1965. The Beatles were free from concert, radio, or film commitments at that time for the first time in their career. This often described as a folk rock album, incorporating pop, soul, and folk musical styles. The title Rubber Soul derives from the saying "plastic soul," which is acknowledging their lack of authenticity compared to American African soul artists. Second Beatles LP after Hard Day's Night in 1964 to contain only original material. Previously, they'd always put a few covers on every album, so this is a big turning point for the band. The musical and lyrical evolution of the band, it demonstrates the Beatles' increasing maturity as lyricists and experimentation with brighter guitar tones, new instruments like sitars, harmonium, and fuzz bass, which we'll get into as we get into the tracks. Represents a progression in the band's treatment of an album format as an artistic platform. That touches on what you were talking about at the start of this, Andrew. It's an art form, and creating an album like this. It's and you, Simon, said it as well. It's a whole album, not just a one single, like top 10 single. You said this, Andrew. It's not just doing a top 10 single, doing a whole album. It's a number one seller. Highly influential on the Beatles at the time, shifting their focus towards creating, high quality albums. It's recognized by critics as a key work in the creation of styles like psychedelia and progressive rock. It's certified 6 times platinum in 1997, indicating shipments of at least 6 million copies in the US alone. Composed soon after the Beatles returned to London following their August 65 North American tour. It reflects influence from soul music acts, Motown, Stax Records, contemporary folk rock of Dylan and the Byrds. Reflects the Beatles' experiences in America, meeting Bob Dylan and Elvis. The album was part of a scheduled established released by manager Brian Epstein and record producer George Martin. Represents the Beatles' departure from their earlier sound, exploring new themes influenced by literature, experimentation with drugs, interest in the recording studio. They became a studio junkies. They wanted to experiment in the studio. This album also reflects John Lennon's maturity as a songwriter. He was heavily influenced by Bob Dylan at the time. George Harrison's outlook transformed by experimentation of LSD also plays heavily on the sound of this record. The recording, like I said, was done on October the 12th, 65 at EMI Studios in London. Final production and mixdown took place in November 15. It was a tight deadline for a pre-Christmas release, and the Beatles worked solely on the recording project alone. They had no gigs, no other commitments. The Beatles took control in the studio, reflecting a new affection for recording over live performances. So there was obviously a shift in the band here too. They were getting away from live performing and really wanted to experiment in the studio. Departure from standard rock and roll instrumentation, incorporating Indian sitar on Norwegian wood, use of harmonium during the sessions, making its introduction into rock music on this record. They experimented with sounds, including McCartney playing fuzz bass, like I said, use of piano made to sound like a bar-esque harpsichord, and reception of this album, recognized as the first Beatles record notably to be drug influenced, highly praised by critics, opening up the possibility of pop music in terms of lyrical and musical scope and landscape. Considered a synthesis of folk, rock, soul, proto-psychedelia, and sitar, a significant development in sophistication, thoughtfulness, and ambiguity of the Beatles' lyrics. This comprehensive summary captures the key points and details about the Beatles' Rubber Soul album for me. Have you guys got anything you'd like to add? Simon, Andrew?
I've got one or two things. I just while you were talking, Brian, I was just having a flick, and I just show these because I think it's kind of instructive about where the Beatles were going, basically against a sort of backdrop of. So this is the Beach Boys album from the same year. Okay,
Yep.
so look at that for the album cover, just the album cover, and there we are. That's the Pretty Things, well-known British group, R&B group, Pretty Things. Okay,
Yep.
so quite straightforward album covers. Picture of the band on the thing, quite straightforward. And then, of course, you get, and I think the major influence on this is, of course, this album. You get a much more sort of psychedelic view of the world, that circle business, and then you get the Birds. You're getting much more in the realm, and then of course you get that, and to me that those last three albums are very much, you can see the join, if you like, between the two, whereas the mainstream other rock bands and stuff, as I say, like the Beach Boys, the Pretty Thing, even see, that's the Beach Boys album. It's a world away from Rubber Soul, isn't it? A world away in style and in concept from Rubber Soul, and I think it's important, that, and I think that what I've just shown is that that the Beatles were, one of the major influences on this is meeting Dylan in '65 in New York, smoking marijuana with him, and and clearly he's had not only Highway 61 but also Bringing It All Back Home, which are two of the greatest albums ever made. Just saying. And their influence on what the Beatles are doing is undeniable, and everyone knows that. But I think the style and their view on what they did is in line with Dylan and the Birds and what they were doing, more than and people like the Beach Boys, as Brian Wilson apparently heard it and then was up all night like, oh my God, what have they done? And then and it's difficult in hindsight to feel how important these records were, how important Rubber Soul was as a development. The first 6 months of the year they were spent doing Help, which is a pretty straightforward 4-track album, and they go releasing Help in August to releasing Rubber Soul in December, and you can feel that giant leap forward, just by listening to these records. And I would say, amazing, you record it in 4 weeks, and then 4 weeks later it's out in the shops, bang,
Unbelievable.
Well, it's you think you think about the '70s and later, where you'd record an album, it would take you a year, and you would and then it wouldn't come out for 6 months or a while longer, and there'll be all scheduling and all of that stuff. Nope, this is get in there, do something, knock it out. And I think, Johnny, that's a great point. John Lennon is 25 and Paul McCartney is 23. It's extraordinary what they did, and so I just wanted to kind of fill in a bit of the background for of what else is going on, and and I think that Dylan particularly is the lightning rod for this, and in pushing it forward. But they took that influence, but they've made it their own and done their own things with it. But absolutely, for sure,
yeah. It was a that is something I've mentioned in my notes for some of these songs, that the age of the band, what their age is as opposed to the lyrical content. It's they're maturing quite quickly for their age. But before I go too far, I just wanted to also mention I've got a lot of information from a lot of different sources, but one of the books that I've been leaning on quite heavily whenever we do these Beatles albums. I don't know if you guys have got this book, but it's called The Beatles, The Complete Beatles Recording Sessions. So I use this quite heavily for the information, because it seems to be quite in depth. I mean, I could go on for hours about each song. That's got a description of what they did in the studio that day, blah, blah, blah. Have you guys seen this book? Andrew, I think you've seen it, haven't you?
Yeah, I've seen it for sure.
You got it.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, that the the amount of detail that you can find about the Beatles, about what they did on particular days. I mean, we could talk about Mark Lewisham's book, Tune In, the first of his massive trilogies, where he spent the last, was it 14 years or something, compiling the second bit of it, because every day he finds out another piece of information for a particular day, and then you have to go and cross-check it and cross-reference it and all that. But the amount of information in that book and the amount of information that we've got about where they were, what they did, what they were doing don't you think it's I think it's amazing that that level of what they have for breakfast.
This is around the Rubber Soul era. That's George. For the majority of those photos is George. I just love this book. It's got some great stuff in it, guys. So if you ever got an opportunity to get your hands on it, I think it's well worth it. But,
Lewisham wrote that. Lewisham wrote that one too.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to mention that. Yeah. Yes, Mark Lewisham. Yeah. So yeah, it's a great book. But you guys got anything else you want to add, Andrew, before we get into the rankings?
No, fantastic introduction and second points by the Rock Professor. Fantastic.
Again, don't shoot me if you're a bigger fan than me and you know more, because I'm like I said, and Andrew's also mentioned, we are fans. We're just using the information we're given. But yeah. So if I've missed anything, please add it in the comments later or, in the chat now.
Oh, very welcome. All of that. Yeah. Added knowledge is added knowledge. Yeah, for sure.
So we've got the opening track of the album is Drive My Car. What a fantastic opening track. I have to say I'm shocked every time I listen to this album and how fresh and clean this sounds. The sound is just so, it's not dated. It just sounds clean, big. It's got a true representation of the Beatles sound here at this particular time. Starts with that lead guitar intro, followed by the bass by McCartney, and the band kicks in together. It's a McCartney composition, obviously Lennon helping out with lyrics. I personally, from my research that I've been doing on this in particular album this week, I know Harrison, I personally think he probably needs some sort of a songwriting credit on this, in my opinion, for the ideas of making this song so good. I mean, if you want a little background, Harrison was a big sort of soul music and Motown fan as well, and he encouraged them to record the dual guitar and bass riff together, sort of like Otis Redding's Respect song that Aretha Franklin covered and stuff like that. So that guitar and bassing, doom 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 doom, and I mean the guitar could have just been playing the chords, it could have been doing anything about it. I think that's given the song the depth that it needs. So Harrison's idea there should have really got him some sort of credit, in my opinion. Ringo's drumming, he's just a fantastic drummer. If you listen to what he does on the hi-hats in particular in this song, it's phenomenal. There's an amazing harmonies going on there. There's a thing going on between McCartney and Lennon in the lead vocal. So McCartney, I have to mention this, McCartney's the focal point of the song with his lead vocal, but John's voice, his dissonance with his in the background, and it gives it a considerable amount of weight. So the lead vocal, predominantly McCartney, but it is Lennon singing with him as well. And I think it's amazing the way these guys worked at this point in their career. They actually knew each other's voice so well. They knew how to complement each other. Obviously, that's coming from their background of hard gigging back in the day before they released Please Please Me. They were gigging and doing, massive marathon gigs where they had to do, complement each other's voice at that particular time. McCartney's bass playing, I mean, wow, he's, I don't know if he's rated high enough as a bass player. I think he's a phenomenal bass player. And to think that, he just took on bass at the start of it because John and Paul didn't want to play bass is phenomenal. His ideas are incredible. The lyrics are leaning towards materialism, success, and there's like a bit of a parody going on with the Beatles' success and celebrity status at the time. I've got here fantastic guitar playing. Solo is great. I believe the solo is George Harrison. I may be wrong there. Nice piano parts to emphasize that chorus. Great melody, catchy chorus. An absolute cracker and banger to start the record off. I have to give this 100 out of 10, and I've listened to this track, about 100 times this week. It's phenomenal. So 100 out of 10, guys. And I'm going to say this straight out before I pass it on. I haven't ranked everything 100 out of 10. I could have. I've tried to be, diplomatic in the way that we rank albums. And if this is your first time watching us rank an album, we rank the tracks on the album, not against other Beatles songs. So we rank it as per Rubber Soul. So we give a nice honest ranking as per the track listing. So we're not ranking this against Help or something, or we're not doing that. This is just on Rubber Soul. We're ranking them from 1 to 10, and 100 just means it's not rankable. Andrew, I believe you're next.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. I think it's one of the greatest opening songs on a Beatles album. As I said to you guys before, I was familiar with the song way before I actually sat down and listened to the album. But the song grows in stature, doesn't it, when you consider what comes after this? So you realise why they started this album with this great song. It's fantastic. Drive My Car is a blues slang for let's have sex. So again, the Beatles are pushing the envelope. Back in '65, they knew that. They understood what was going on. It was termed, I understand, a comedy song because some people realised that back then. So they, just to sort of give them a bit of cover, Brad, they just said, it could be seen as a comedy song. But, the Beatles, being who they are, influenced by what was happening around them, knew what was going on. So, and these English guys have got a great history, haven't they, of sort of pushing the envelope with writing songs about naughty subjects. And you would think, Brad, it's just about some dude driving a car for some starlet somewhere. But no, not with the two main songwriters. One of the great things I love about this album too, and the research that I've read over the years, it's probably the last album where the two main principal songwriters, Simon, collaborated together on the songs. Revolver, they weren't doing that. They were basically writing songs independently on Revolver, getting a little bit of feedback, but this is definitely a collaboration between the McCartney and Lennon. Brad, this is a Beatles song with pure bottom end, isn't it? Being the backdoor man, you'd know. Sorry.
Oh, we love a bit of bottom end.
Stop that.
All right. But it is, yeah, and I'm being serious. It's got bottom end, and one of the reasons why it's because of the bass. That Paul Rickenbacker, that Paul is playing his Rickenbacker, and we'll talk about that because we've got some photos. And Brad mentioned too the Motown connection, and again we'll talk about that a little bit more when Paul is definitely following Jamison's lead. But definitely one of the crucial ingredients, Brad, and thank you for bringing that up. You got to love the beep, beep, and beep, beep. Yeah, everybody knows that. That's just
uncanny,
fantastic. It's just such an easy line. And I remember thinking when I was a young guy, beep, 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 yeah, and you can make a song out of that, Brad. It's just phenomenal. It still blows me away. Is that a slide guitar? I've read a few books over the years, and some people are saying that it could be a slide guitar at the end that George is playing on the outro solo. So I don't know.
I think he's more doing those unison bends. That's what I think.
Okay,
but it could be a slide. you know.
I don't know. I'd read that Paul McCartney played lead guitar on this, not Harrison.
So
Okay.
this is where we gave our caveat, folks, at the beginning, because there's a lot of information out there from a lot of people reputing to be a lot more knowledgeable than us. So we're not definitive in our presentations, but yeah. I don't know. It's just a great guitar solo. So I agree with you, Brad. What other point do I? You mentioned Narcotics being influential on this album. Yes, it was called the Pot album, and I understand this was the first Beatles song to go past midnight. It finished it in the morning. So, the beginning of a trend that they were going to follow, and not only them, but other rock and rollers around the world were going to follow for a long, long time. Brad, score. Brad.
Brad, score. Brad.
Look, before you take on, Simon, I just want to say I've read contradiction thing on who played the solo as well.
Yeah.
And I have read that, you know, Paul, and it's part of my introduction, I left off because I didn't want it to be controversial, but I believe Paul was pretty hard on George on this record. And
you're right, bro, and we can talk about that. Maybe we should save that for the conclusion. Let's say that, because I think we've all got some opinions on that, because there's some people that have come out with some books that have said some nasty things about George in particular. So let's save that for the conclusion. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Good
idea.
Sorry, bro, but I think it's going to be much better for the conclusion, I think, for you to talk about that. So again, we're not here. Can I just? I'm going to say it once, and we're not going to say it anymore. I'm not here to correct Simon, and Simon's not here to correct Brad from whatever research material we've got. So we're just here to present what we've got, and that's it. Is that okay?
We love the Beatles.
Yeah.
It's a discussion. It's a discussion.
Yeah.
I think. I think these. I think you bring up a point, and we discuss it as a to see and I think we don't have to. I'm not, in spite of my sobriquet, I'm not righter than everyone else, except I am. But and leading on from that, Brad, I enjoyed your defense of the indefensible, which is our scoring system. Which, if you want to see the formula, then I'll send it to you. But it's a very long and complicated formula, worked out.
Yeah.
Or it isn't.
Yeah.
It's fun. That's what it is.
Exactly. It's all fun. It's not serious. It's just all about, it's really celebrating each album individually and ranking it as per the album. So
absolutely. Not to be taken too seriously, possibly. Anyway, yes, so Drive My Car. The thing I'd say about it is that I think that the lyrics, I've taken on from Andrew's point about the lyrics, I think it's that they plug into a kind of the new kind of freedom for women thing that was going on. Feminism is starting to on the rise, and asked the girl what she wanted to be. She said, "Baby, can't you see? I want to be famous, a star on a screen, but you could do something in between." There's a kind of like, there's a implicit in that as a kind of power thing. There's a kind of I've got a career, and I'm pursuing my career, and you may be an interlude in this, but it's actually you're just driving the car, baby. But he's going, I told that girl my prospects were good. She said, "Baby, it's understood. Working for peanuts is all very fine, but I can show you a better time." I think, as I say, there's kind of that thing about the new sexual freedom was going on in the late 60s, and this kind of plugs into that, heavily and reflects that. And I also think possibly that McCartney was going out with Jane Asher, who's clearly an actress, and she wouldn't put her career on the back burner for him, and I think that's one of their contentions between them. I think was that, and one wonders if this is this is a bit of a talk about that from McCartney. It's a McCartney song, so I don't. But I'll just chuck that into the pot of thoughts for you as a thing. I don't have much to add to what you said. Great harmony singing, got cowbell on it, and what track is not improved by having cowbell on it? So it's fantastic. But yeah, 100 out of 10 from me. It's clearly a Brad score. That's what we're going. It's a great opening track. Strong, plenty of vim and vigor. Yeah, great.
Yeah, excellent. It is a hard album to rank, but I'm very serious with my rankings, and you'll see as we go on here. So next song, Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, which is the original title for the song. This Bird Has Flown. I have to say, a fantastic vocal from Lennon on this. And McCartney's harmony is outstanding. I can hear, lots of stylings on this song, but the main one I'm hearing is like a folksy sort of thing, very Dylan sort of thing comes to mind. This really highlights the maturity of the band for me at this point in their career and the direction they would head in after this album. There's a lot of that. Written by Lennon about an extramarital affair, hiding the truth from his wife, Cynthia. Described a failed meeting with a mysterious girl. In this song has a wonderful sort of mode called Mixolydian melody that creates a drone effect in the acoustic and the guitars, and there's a sitar that George is playing which really pops out and adds flavor to the song. The sitar really sits there as part of the melody of the song as well. If you're not familiar with what that sort of drony sort of thing going on there, I believe George was, dabbling with a sitar. He didn't really know how to play it properly, but he worked out what to play on the sitar for this song. So that's to George's credit. I think it's a big part of the song, and I still think he should have got a credit for that as well. So I'm in George's corner here, as you can probably tell. But this song highlights the brilliance of Lennon. He shines high on this song. We can't dismiss that at all. But also we can't dismiss the contributions of the other three Beatles. I could go on for ages about this song because I absolutely adore it. I think it's fantastic. It's a great second song for the album and definitely something different from past recordings, from Help and earlier. It's got a different feel altogether. I've given this a 10 out of 10, guys, and never a skip. Andrew.
Yeah, bro. Oh, I don't know what to say about the song. This song blew me away when I was a young fellow, and every time I listen to it, it still does. I just think it's a phenomenal song. I love the vocals. You've already mentioned the vocals. Paul McCartney's bass on this track is incredible, Simon. He's got that Rickenbacker bass, and he's definitely following on from Jameson, those Motown guys. There is some debate about what songs, I'm a bit of a Paul McCartney bass fan, so there's a lot of debate and discussion, Simon, on what tracks are being played with the Hofner and what tracks are being played with the Rickenbacker, but this is definitely one, and there's another track coming up that we know that's definitely being played with the Rickenbacker bass, but certainly provides the bottom end. And I think the Beatles loved that because they were getting that back, Brad and Simon, on their records because they were used to playing with Paul's bottom end live for a long, long time, but they couldn't get that on the albums. But now, over the short period of 2 years, Brad, I think they went from, technology where they couldn't put it on their first two albums to this album here, where they could definitely enhance it. They can definitely get it. And Jeff Emmerich's one of the guys responsible for it, and we can talk a little bit more about him later on. I'm glad you mentioned the sitar. Again, we're giving folks a lot of homework here. Go and read these, is this the first time a sitar was recorded on a British rock pop track. You know, there's debate and discussion about that. You know, so I'm gonna say yes because it's the Beatles and George was playing it. But again, as the rock professor said earlier, you know, we're not here to correct anybody, but there's a whole discussion going on about, you know, whether or not it is or isn't. It's all part of the fun. One other point, though, I love the acoustic guitar, and I'm glad that you mentioned that there was a folk element to this album, Brad, in your introduction, because it definitely is. And this is the track where they're sort of getting another strain of music back from these Americans, and it's definitely in that folk field, isn't it? And then you got George on the 12-string acoustic. You know, I'm sure it's George. It's got to be George on the 12-string, unless John's double tracking, but unless it's Paul McCartney. You know, it might be Paul yeah, okay. You get where we're going? Not even the experts really know. Until, I suppose, when Lewisham comes out with his biography, Simon, then all debates are going to be put aside.
We might find out.
Yeah. One little point that I want to make before I pass it on to the rock professor, he mentioned there was a relationship between the Beatles and Bob Dylan. Huge relationship. They hung out with each other. They were influencing each other. And there's a famous album called Blonde on Blonde that Paul McCartney and John Lennon kind of influenced Bob Dylan in a way, because he came out with that album, I think, a year later. And there's a song called Fourth Time Around. Go and check that out. And this is where Bob Dylan's pinching a little bit of what the guys are doing on this track on his song. And it kind of freaked John Lennon out a little bit from what I read, because he didn't know whether Bob Dylan, and the rock professor was going to probably define it for us in concrete, whether or not he was taking the piss or he was celebrating the Beatles. You know, John didn't get the answer, so he didn't know whether it was, you know, his Bobness taking the piss or being complimentary. I don't know. I think he was being complimentary.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think so.
Can I give this another Brad score?
Oh, why not?
Yes.
Simon,
if you want to.
I have to. I just think the song's phenomenal. Love it.
It's out there, isn't it? Isn't it? Well, in answer to your question, I think that with Bob, you can't really tell. But if you've watched the film, what's it? No Direction Home.
Yeah.
You know, the black and white film of him. You know, his 65 tour of the UK. Just, you know, and that thing where he's sitting and he gets introduced to Donovan.
Yes.
You see, and Donovan plays Try and Catch the Wind, and you can see Dylan like with behind his sunglasses and his cool kind of, you know, and he's looking at him, and as soon as he starts to sing, you can see Dylan go, yeah, right, okay, yeah, right. So, you know, I think that Bob is quite competitive in many ways, and but I don't think this is unkind by any some distance. But I think it's there's always a touch of competitive. It's like, yeah. Well, you can take what I've done, but I can also take what you've done and turn it back on itself, kind of thing. So I think there's a bit of friendly competition in there as well, as because Bob definitely competitive on the writing front. But as you said, you know, this is clearly, you know, and we know, you know, it's well documented. This is clearly inspired by Bob, by Dylan's writing, and you know, and the kind of thing about writing for yourself, writing about yourself a bit more, and kind of you know, changing it around a bit and things, you know, muddying things up, making things a bit more ambiguous and things, not just hold my hand, is it, Norwegian Wood by Country Mile. Completely different. And I like the fact that it's inspired by Norwegian wood, which was something in the Jane Asher's household where he stayed. That's quite funny. Actually, a thing called Norwegian wood. As you said, it is unlike, if you think back to what was around in '65. It's a pretty unique song. So that's, that single kind of rundown, as you've described, Brad, that kind of, that rundown thing over the D chord, and the sitar, very early use of the sitar thing. I think that for me, there's a certain amount of, and you've talked about, Andrew, a bit about, I was sort of struck that sort of 12-string influence, Bird's influence, but done on the sitar kind of thing. Because I know, that was it in 8 Miles High? They should play a solo like John Coltrane, on a 12-string guitar kind of thing. And I feel that sitar thing is a bit of Bird's influence, but done on a sitar, not on a 12-string guitar. That brings it, it brings it color, it brings it distinct, it's. You can tell that George is feeling his way round the sitar, can't you? Because I mean, it's basically quite, it's a low drone in the single note in the second verse, and then in the third verse it plays a sort of high note drone kind of thing. As so I could tell he's kind of getting, but it's all about texture, it's all about color, it's all about new sounds and new things, and oh look, here's the 5150 dog. Mascot, see that pedal show have a dog? We've got one too.
Hey, Pepper.
She's 5 today.
5.
Birthday.
Oh,
She's
birthday.
5 today.
Happy birthday. See. I notice how she studiously ignores us. That's very good.
Oh,
That's
very
quite
good.
right too.
I've trained her well.
Yes. So I think it's this is a Brad score song. I think it's it's transcended in many ways. The album is just one of those songs by the Beatles that is one of their watershed moments, where they moved forward as a giant step in their creative process and what they wrote about and the way that they wrote. And if you can attach it to Dylan, who better to attach it to? So yes, Brad score from me, 100 out of 10. Clearly never a skip. Do I have to say it?
I don't think there's a skip on the album. Let's but that's our
We'll
tagline.
We'll see.
Oh, okay. Excellent, guys. I mean, look, we're on the same path so far with this stuff, and how can you not be, I guess? But the next track is You Won't See Me. I believe this was McCartney reflecting on his relationship with Jane Asher at the time. So it was written solely by Paul McCartney. I guess lyrically, if you listen to it, it's like addressing miscommunication. It has a Motown flavor and feel happening for me. The verse chord sequence, I believe they borrowed from the Four Tops. It's the same old song. Yep. I love the stabbing guitar parts. Ding, ding. I love that stabbing guitar. It's a great laid-back vocal from Paul. The harmonies are fantastic. You can really hear George Harrison's harmony popping out in quite a bit of the song, which is fantastic. I love that bit. The time after time bridge section where he goes time after time. That's just like goosebump material for me. It's wonderful. And Ringo, if you listen to his drumming on this song, that's outstanding. I mean, if you really got to listen to what he's playing, but it's very intricate stuff he's doing on that hi-hat alone. Ringo, I don't think he's underrated as a drummer, but I think he deserves more attention than he gets as a drummer, because he's got a lot of character in his playing, and he plays the perfect thing for every song. I was actually talking to the keyboard player in Rewind 80s that I played a gig with last night, and we were talking about Ringo, and something came up, and how little he actually plays in some of the later material. than he did in the early material, because that's all the song required. So, you know, that alone, his drumming is phenomenal on this track. Overall, it's a great song with a very catchy melody, and I gave it a 9 out of 10 and never a skip, gentlemen. Andrew.
Thanks, Emmett. And thank you, Holly and Alan, for giving us your rankings too. You guys are fantastic. Thank you for contributing to our show. Always appreciate your contributions, bro. Look, you know, 2 takes apparently to do this song.
Yes.
Remarkable, isn't it? Very much a Paul McCartney song. Now, we've mentioned it a few times, folks, but this is really, really important for you guys to understand how the Beatles, and again, how in particular Paul McCartney borrowed from these Motown guys. And if you want to get a bit of an appreciation, there's a wonderful documentary that came out in 2002 called Standing in the Shadow of Motown, which is an hour and a half, and it talks about the Funk Brothers, and there's a lot of information on Jamison playing with the hook. And this is the first song where we get the bass, Brad. And McCartney talks about this in his book that he did with a guy, I forget. There's a review of it on the channel many years from now where he talks about how James Jamison gave him the idea of just using the bass, not using the bass just for doing the you know, just for providing the bottom end. Jamison was using the bass to provide the melody lines, and this is where McCartney does it with the bass on this track. So for that alone, Brad, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 because I think it's phenomenal, not a miserable 9.
Churlish, miserable 9.
Yeah. Time out for a 9. Eh? Timed out for a 9.
Right. 1 minute in the corner for Mr. Cook.
I'm just going to rank them all 10.
Sorry, bro. Yeah,
what you should be doing.
but I think that's one of the great things about this album, you know, and we're going to be repeating ourselves, how there are elements of if you want to understand Paul McCartney's bass playing on Abbey Road, for example, go back and listen to this album, and that puts the bass playing into context. There's a lot of there's a lot of threads, and hopefully our show is providing maybe a couple of little threads for you guys to go and have a little look at. Holly's provided a wonderful thread in the comment there about Eddie Van Halen and Sammy Hagar trying to play Norwegian Wood. Go and check that out. It's a laugh. It's hilarious.
Nice.
But the la 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 la, you know, I love that. You know, just these simple harmonic melodies that these guys do. They can just make it sound so good, can't they? You know, and you sometimes think, Simon, you can get caught up in the vocals of this band without sort of paying attention too much to the music. I'm not going to say anything more about it. I could go on for another half hour, but we've only got, I won't swear. What did Brad give it? He got timed out for 9. No, this is not a Brad score. It's 10 out of 10. Rock Professor.
Track 3, timeouts. Honestly, harsh critics, aren't we? Just a quick follow-up. The Funk Brothers were a group of Detroit-based session musicians who performed on most Motown records from 59 to 72, and there were 13 of them, in total, which clearly the most famous one is James Jameson on bass, Richard Pistol Allen, and various other people. But yeah, they just basically were the Motown house band. Yeah, not all of them played on everything, but through the years, 13. A bit like the Motown version of Booker T and the MGs, who were Stax, who played on all the Stax stuff. So just a bit of background on the Funk Brothers if you're not familiar with them. But Andrew's right. Go and watch that. That documentary, which is an amazing documentary about all of that. Yeah, I'll just pick out a couple of things about this. It's got piano on it for stars. I think it's the first track with the piano, so you could see the diversity. The first track is fairly straightforward Beatles thing. The second one is an acoustic number, very much kind of based on one chord. This has a piano on it. A bit more straightforward. It's got those. Yeah.
Simon, the first track has piano on it.
Does it? No. Yes. It does. I've written it down as well. Bugger.
Sorry, I had to jump in.
What?
The rock professor's wrong.
Again.
Sorry.
Again.
Played by John.
Yeah, it's played by a different person. That's what the difference is.
Sorry.
I was just getting to that. Yeah, it's got piano played by not John. It makes it a completely different instrument.
Yeah.
Oh dear. But sorry, yes, I like them. And that typical Harrison guitar stabs thing that you pointed out as well. That's definitely. But also, I marvel almost every track on the harmony singing. It's just so good, so kind of pure. I think there's it's up there. The Byrds, but another fantastic vocal harmony group as well. But this is up there with anything. I find those the ooh la la las and all that, the three parts that they do is just incredible, really. Spine tingling when they do it as a three piece.
So it's phenomenal. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to back you up, Simon. It's just something like that, something as basic and simple as that, and you just go and listen to it. It's just, wow.
No, definitely. It's just and of course all done live, all done without the aid of any kind of tuning or anything like that. It's just go in the studio and sing it. Get round a microphone and just do it. And I think we must never forget that that is a skill all of its own. It definitely is a skill, isn't it? As all of its own. So I mean, for that, 10 out of 10 from me. Never a skip. And Mr. Walton tells me there's an organ on it as well. The old Deaf Aid isn't working. I didn't hear an organ on it. That's terrible.
So you probably can see when we get to it, some of the pictures I think Andrew might show have got some photos in the studio. You'll see how close confined they work together. And I believe this is the first recording that they did on 4-track, Simon, I believe. I think it was 4-track in the studio. So they were able to do a few more tracking, but they would group their tracking. So you would see them doing their harmonies together around a microphone and things like that. So they're not each individual person's not doing their own track like today in Pro Tools. Everyone can have their own isolated track. No, they did a lot of their stuff live. So that even their harmonies, they just tried to nail it live, which I wanted to back you up there, Simon. That's a lot of the stuff they did was live in the studio. So yeah, phenomenal.
I think you're absolutely right. It is worth saying that they whistled through it, didn't they? You go in, record, and a lot of it's done live for starters. The band playing together, and then it's and then go back and do some overdubs. But bouncing down and all of those things certainly came into operation.
Yeah, 100%.
He's back. The boss is back.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, did you want to show some photos, or you want to do another song first? Hold on. What did you feel like doing? Showing some photos now, or?
Yeah. I'll do some photos. So just
apparently, Brad, the first 4-track recording done by the Beatles was "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
Right. Okay.
Before that, it was 2-track. The first 2 albums, Please Please Me, with the Beatles, recording on 2-track machines. So that's direct tape. But 63, they got 4-track machines, and then in 68 they got 8-track So,
yep. Fair enough. That's fine.
Research. It's all an evolution. Finding out.
The mop tops.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not. See, if you go back to that, Andrew, that's not the same vibe as the album cover at all, is it? See, that's the kind of serious art vibe. That's, as you say, much more the kind of mop top sort of vibe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. I went to distorted a lot of the graphic to make it look a little bit more psychedelia as well, I think. So yeah, this is
the same era, isn't it? The same time.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yep.
Yes. Yep. All these photos are from roughly that time frame. So you can see in the studio here, they work quite closely together, and a lot of the tracking was done live just to get it down. So
that George Harrison with his Bob Dylan hat on.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
So there's a couple of little tidbits here that you should have a look at. So see, Paul McCartney is using this Casino. Now the Casinos don't become a guitar for the other two Beatles until after this album's released, and it becomes their main acts through 67 through Revolver. It's their main guitars. But you can see Paul's playing his Casino. And what's that guitar George is playing? It looks like a Duosonic.
It does, yeah. And I can't work out what Paul's playing. John's playing. Is he playing a bass or is that a 6-string?
No, it's
I
a
think
6-string.
that's a Gretsch.
I look like a Gretsch or a Casino, is it?
Okay.
Certainly a hollow body. Certainly a
no, he hasn't got his Casino body. Then.
Is he not?
No.
And if you look in the far right of the corner, you can see a spare kick drum. You can see some hand drums there that Ringo probably used. Yep. So for some reason, my eye always goes across there. But yeah, this was probably Norwegian wood or something like that around that particular time in the studio.
But you see how close they are all together, recording in the, as you said earlier, Brad, in that little room, just all together.
Yeah.
Knocking it out. Fantastic.
Yeah. George with the Rickenbacker to get that birdsy sort of thing going on. And Paul being Paul, directing traffic on the guitar.
Not there.
So there's a pic there of the famous Rickenbacker bass that featured heavily on this album. I think you were you'd shot out of the show for a while there, Brad. But there's lots of discussion by Beatles nuts as to what songs featured this bass and the Hofner.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a couple that we know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can see one there. So see where the capo is?
That's what I was about to say. Look where the capo is on that bass.
Oh, wow, he's got a capo on his bass, blimey.
Mm-hmm.
There it is there.
And that's a little secret I'm going to throw out there. A lot of Motown guys used to do that. They put a capo on their bass.
Did they put a capo on?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So they can use the same pattern and then just, playing in different keys. So, but we know the song that clearly this is featured on's Coming Up. So we won't tell you what the song is unless you guys in the chat already know.
Well, maybe when you get to that song and you can mention it. Andrew, when we get to that song, you can bring it up so people know what it is.
Andrew will be mentioning it.
So here's a couple of pics here that we love to make references to the material that we use, folks, for you to go and check it out. Here's a book here that came out a couple of years ago by Jeff Emmerich, Here, There and Everywhere. It's fantastic, fascinating, cheap book, $20. There is one warning, though. One warning when you read this book. He does not say nice things about George Harrison. So I'll do a 5-minute review on the channel during the week and talk about a couple of those things so that you can skip them. I'll do the nasty work for you. But other than that, though, he's got to be taken at his word, Simon and Brad, because he was the engineer. He was there. So his opinions about people doesn't really matter when he's talking about the process and the technology and how things were done, Simon. Well, then we can take him at his word. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I don't know if I said. I'm sure I've said this before on this channel, but I have a kind of theory that being in a band brings out the worst. Can bring out the worst in people. You know, in terms of behaviours and things like that. I don't know why, but I'm sure I've been in bands where, you know, some of the behaviours, like in any other walk of life, would just not be tolerated. You know, I've seen things, you know, in bands. If at work, it just wouldn't be tolerated. You know, and yet some, you know, you feel like you can do this. You know, I don't know what it is about. I don't know if you agree with that as a kind of theory, but I do have a kind of theory that bands can bring out the worst. If you really want to find out what somebody's like, get in a band with them, and then you'll find out what they're really like. You know, when you tell them that not to play that and play that, how do they take criticism, and how do they take, you know, how you deliver it? And yeah, I don't know if that's just a theory, so I don't know if it's true.
And the last pick there is another book by a guy called Ian MacDonald, Revolution in the Head.
Famous.
It's outstanding. Go and check that out. It's available on Kindle. Along with Lewisham's book as well that Brad's got. You know, you'll be well sorted. And I'll just highlight Brad so you can get a title of that if you guys are interested in going to do some research. We want you to go and do this because there's lots of opinions. The introduction essay by Ian MacDonald is fantastic. Go and read it. And there's Brad there he's got that copy.
Yep.
And it's also, you can also get, it's in a cover that looks like that as well. So go and get it. Mark Lewisham is the dude.
He's amazing.
Very, very informative book, and you know, even doing a ranking show and using information now that there's so much information left out that I didn't put into the introduction. You know, there's impossible. So much there.
Yeah. No. And that's why we invite you to go in. And if anybody is watching or that will comment from those other Beatles Facebook groups, please, if you've heard anything about when part 2, it's been 12 years since he dropped volume 1. So, you know, it'll be nice to get it because it'll be because the second one is at the start of Beatlemania, isn't it? So
goes to 62, doesn't it? The first one, and then the second one is supposed to be 62 to 66.
Correct.
I think. Yeah. So
I did hear one thing though. One of the reasons why there is a delay. I saw on one of their podcasts, and forgive me, I can't remember, but apparently Yoko Ono opened up John Lennon's archives to him. So that's one of the. So he had to go through the archives, Brad. So.
Nice.
So that probably caused him, chaos and mayhem to go through that because, you know, if the archives are open, you have to go through it because you can't write about it if someone says, but you didn't go through my archives.
I think we should say that he's worked a lot for Apple Corporation in the past and things, and EMI and things. So he's sort of an insider. They know, you know, know that he's not going to stitch him up or like that. So it's, you know, so yeah. Well, I can't remember when the first one is about 2012 or something. Is it? It's just been. It's hold on. Volume 1. Tune in 2013. It was so he's been writing volume 2 for 10 years. Yeah, probably more than that.
October 2013, Simon. You're right.
Yeah. So
how many years? So, 10 years.
Oh, 10 years. It's currently 10 years. We're going into the 11th year. I note he's less than a month older than me. Oh, it cheers me up no end.
What was interesting is that 2 years after this came out, he said it would be probably in 2 Christmases.
Yes. But he didn't take two Christmas from when, did he? But I think then is but I mean, he's got loads of stuff on YouTube and things, and he's well worth checking out. He's really interesting and massively involved. And if you're into the Beatles, he is the man to go and watch, listen to about because every story, every fact is double checked, triple checked, and things. But
if you're watching, Mark,
amount of stories.
If
If
you're
you'd
watching,
like
Mark,
to come on, Mark. He hasn't got time. He hasn't got time to come on our show. He's got a book to write.
All right, let's
well worth checking out. But yeah, let's just start. Let's do another song, quick.
Yeah, let's get back on track because we're going to be here for 5 hours otherwise. I thought we'd be done in an hour and a half, and of course we're not. I thought
the trouble with Andrew, he talks too much.
No, I thought when Andrew said, "Oh, maybe we should split it in two," I'm thinking, "Oh no, maybe we'll get through it in one." And now I'm completely wrong. So, all right, so we're up to Nowhere Man, aren't we? Nowhere Man. Yeah. Okay, so Nowhere Man. This is written by John Lennon during his Fat Elvis period, reflecting, on his appearance and how he was feeling at the time and his concerns about, he was reflecting on all that. This is Lennon at his finest, I think. He really is quite an amazing songwriter, and especially for his age. Like we mentioned at the header of this, they're very young at this particular time in their life to be writing such mature and grown-up themes, in my opinion. But they obviously experienced quite a lot during their career at this point. So obviously people mature quite quickly when they go through what they go through. I put here lovely guitar solo, nice harmonic touch at the end of the solo. I believe it's played by George Harrison on a Fender Stratocaster with a fuzz. And first Beatles song to avoid like a boy-girl relationship, I think, and featuring Lennon's self-loathing. It was more to do with himself than a relationship as such. They were really inspired by the Byrds sound because they went into a Byrds recording session, and that you can hear that in the sound of this song. There's a really inspired sound there. They even applied like an equalizer to the electric guitars to make it sort of sound even more Byrdsy. Let's also mention and discuss how good I think Lennon's vocal is on this song. It's spooky. There's a haunting feel about it, and the way Paul adds that harmony, it just sounds amazing. I love this song. I think every human being at some point in their life can relate to a song like Nowhere Man. And for that alone, this song, I reckon, is 100 out of 10 and never a skip. Andrew.
Yeah, I agree with you about the Fat Elvis period. Definitely. And it's interesting listening to John talk about that. You kind of got a laugh when he talks about that, because he did put on a little bit of weight there for a little while. But
too many egg and chips.
Yeah, and then he discovered drugs and then got skinny. So apparently, Nowhere Man came literally from nowhere. He, like Paul McCartney, very, very regimented with their songwriting, the time that they would put aside for writing songs. So he was, apparently just waiting and waiting, pushing himself to write some songs, and just nothing was coming, Brad. So he just thought, well, F this, threw the pen down and the paper down, switched off, and then all of a sudden the song came from nowhere. So again, that's what I've read. So sounds very much like a John Lennon thing. And then subconsciously, as you said, he's bringing all these aspects and these elements of his life into a song, which tends to be the general consensus with great songwriters, Simon. They bring in their own experiences into a song. And I think that's what gives it definitely the dynamic element and Brad sort of already said that. You mentioned, Brad, too, also about the 4 tracks and the tracking and the recording stuff. What's really interesting about this track is that it's either John and George are playing the guitars together, or it's John playing 2 guitars, or Paul McCartney playing 2 guitars.
Yeah.
I want to know, is there any piano on it?
So apparently what they're doing is they're playing 2 guitars,
Mm.
double tracked onto it's mixed onto a single track and then fed into one of the 4 tracks. So again, kind of, if that makes any sense, again, a kind of revolutionary thing that they were doing in that studio. I love the guitars on this track. You go and listen to it; it's just fantastic. Brad's already mentioned the Byrds and their influence, heavily influential on a lot of bands, weren't they? And the Rock Professors mentioned that also at the start of the show. Brad's already said that it's a reflection on John's life. It's got to be, and that's what makes the song fantastic. And it's a song, Simon, that's gained momentum when people talk about John Lennon, don't they? Certainly since his death. You know, you go and watch any documentary or anything that's been discussed, and somewhere on the soundtrack, Brad, they're going to play "He's a Real Nowhere Man." You know. Look, I love this song. Always loved it. When I first heard it, it was on the Golden Oldies. Do you remember that album that came out, Simon? The Golden Oldies, but it came out in '67. And it was a collection. yeah. They call it the Golden Oldies.
Of things from '65, yes.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and it's got like a guy leaning on a Rolls Royce and that psychedelic kind of thing. But that track's on there. I'm pretty sure it's on that album. And I always thought, Brad, that this was, when I was a young guy, I thought it was the Beatles in their later period. You know, when they were hippies with long hair and beards and all that. And then I was kind of shocked to realise, oh, actually, it was a song early on. So even back then, my ears were sort of attuned to the maturity of the song, if that makes any sense. And again, I love it. So I'm giving this a 10 out of 10. Never a score, never a scrap, never, what is it? Never a skip.
Never a scrap.
Love the guitars.
Love the guitars. Yeah. For me, this is a kind of in kind of style, and it's a kind of acoustic song. Basically, it's kind of as a companion piece to Norwegian Wood in terms of it's not just I want to hold your hand. It's not just boy girl love thing. It's a kind of internalized thing, and I think that's again the Dylan influence coming out. About not writing just about I want to hold your hand kind of stuff. Want to sing about himself and his internal feelings, his internal life, rather than external. And I think that's kind of in keeping with the Norwegian Wood, and that comes from that kind of American folk rock thing. Dylan, you've mentioned the Byrds as well, and I think that the jang of that sparkly lead break by Harrison. It's a really nice harmonic at the end, ding, just at the very end of that little solo bit that Harrison does. Brilliant 3-part singing, some a cappella stuff at the beginning. Really beautiful, the voices dovetail together really nicely. It's just brilliant, isn't it? It's all just brilliant. What can I say that you haven't said already? I think that those things are brilliant, and the parts are not complicated in themselves, but they coalesce into making a song of great beauty and great feeling, just great really. So 100 out of 10 for me. Never a skip. One of the classics on this. But there are so many classics on this, isn't it? I mean, for me, I can remember most of the songs on this album without listening to it. It's quite funny. I could sing them to myself, mutter them to myself, kind of thing. So it's been a joy to think to myself, oh, I know that. Yeah, I know that one. Yes. Oh, yeah. So, very cool. Brad, back to you.
Wonderful.
Hey, Hobo Rating.
Well, we come to George's song, Think for Yourself, and it's an absolute cracker. I think Harrison's lyrical content in this expressed sharp disapproval or criticism of a friend or a lover. George's voice has developed at this stage in his career a lot, and he sings with conviction and sounds fantastic. If people are not familiar with this, George usually got 1 or 2 songs per album. So, this was his, song on this album that I find from previous records to this, his voice had really developed a lot. And there's some fantastic harmonies there. Paul's voice really pops out during the choruses. I always hear Paul's voice, that high sort of harmony always gets in there. It really pops. I love how his voice sounds when he gets up there. And also, we were talking at the header of this, my presentation of this record, I said that McCartney plays some fuzz bass, and this is the particular song he does it in, and adds a real psychedelic sort of feel to the song, in my opinion. It sounds amazing. I love hearing George's contributions to Beatles albums, and each album moving forward, you can really hear George developing into the amazing songwriter he was. Amazing at this point, but throughout his career, he just kept blossoming. And towards the end of the Beatles' career, I think his contributions to the Beatles were as important, if not more important, to the Beatles, because by Abbey Road, I think his 2 songs are probably the most outstanding songs on the record. So well done, George. And I gave this a 9 out of 10, and never a skip, guys. Andrew.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the fuzz, because when we were ranking Hackney Diamonds and the song that Paul was playing fuzz on, we said there was a Beatles song that he played fuzz on, and we couldn't remember which one it was, but we knew it was a famous song. But this is clearly the song that Paul was playing fuzz, and I always loved it. And I still do. I think it's funky. You're right, bro. It's got that psychedelic, pre-psychedelic feel going on, hasn't it? Definitely sort of blowing stuff, into the atmosphere that's going to influence a lot of people next year. In about 6 months' time, everybody's going to be fuzzing. Again, go and check out the information on this. It's interesting because George Harrison loved changing titles on his songs, and this is the first song where it had about 3 or 4 different titles. And the Beatles came back to work on it the second day, and apparently it was called, Won't Be Without You. And then they went back, and the next day, and it's Think for Yourself, and it's like, oh, okay, all right, well, Brad mentioned too that George got some songs. I think from my research, bro, this is his 5th published song.
All right, okay. Yep.
So not bad for your 5th published song, eh? When you consider he's surrounded by 2 of the greatest songwriting giants in the world.
Very hard to get your point across when you got 2 songwriters like Lennon and McCartney. That's for sure.
But for his fifth one, it's not too bad. And again, I want to back you up and sort of reiterate a point too that the Rock Professor's been making about the harmonies, the 3-part harmonies on this, especially Paul's voice, and we can hear. We've been listening to the Beatles for our whole lives, and we can hear in the harmonies, can't we? We can hear John's voice, George's voice, and Paul's voice. We know it, and but to hear Paul's voice, especially on this, it's such a treat. Hello, Mr. Harrison. I agree with you. I think it's definitely up there. I've given this a 9 out of 10 too. He gets better, Mr. Harrison, but this is a good place to start.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Simon.
Yeah, it's yes, it's quite a bitter song, really, isn't it? The lyrics are quite bitter, aren't they? They're kind of quite angry and sort of again moving into that, away from the "I want to hold your hand." If you think about, where they were even 6 months ago with "Help," it's not quite the same thing as on here, but so I think that Dylan thing has percolated into Harrison as much as it's percolated into Lennon. Maybe a bit less so with Paul, but maybe not. I don't know. That's something we could think about. Maybe that's not true, but I kind of feel like Paul retains
100% agree with you. I 100%.
Yeah.
Dylan had bugger all influence on Paul McCartney. Bugger all.
Come on, Macca, keep up. Blimey, what do you think this is?
The other two were heavily influenced by Dylan. Yep.
And I think that this is kind of proof to me that this is one of those songs that I don't think Harrison would have written it without Dylan stuff. Dylan's written some fairly bitter songs. You don't know what is happening here, do you, Mr. Jones, kind of thing. So I think that it's definitely a worthy inclusion. It fits in with the vibe of the album, that more kind of introspective thing, different kind of songwriting. And I give it a 9 out of 10 too, and never a skip.
Awesome. Yeah, well done, Georgie. All right, so the next track is The Word, and look, this song starts off with an amazing feel. It's got that real sort of Motown feel at times on the drums and bass in particular. The piano adds a lot of color to the song. The guitar playing on this is outstanding, in my opinion. Vocals from Lennon are unbelievable on this track, and the harmonies from Paul. Where he sings, it just sounds fantastic through those verses. When he's harmonizing off Lennon, they've got this eerie thing that sounds amazing. I love hearing this in my headphones. If you haven't ever listened to Beatles music in your headphones, this particular song is a great one to hear. All the harmonies, it's amazing. Ringo's drumming is remarkable. We've got to give credit to Ringo because, I think a lot of these songs, this feel of this song is credit, in my opinion, all to Ringo and Paul's bass playing. It marks the start of Beatles, psychedelia sort of period where they get high and they write, there's a Motown feel, I know, but there's a psychedelia thing going on. Focus on the concept of universal love and spiritual enlightenment. There's a lot of that going on at this particular time for the band. The word is love. Anticipates the summer of love, apparently. So in my opinion, this is an amazing track, a great second last song for side A, and it doesn't deserve anything less than a 10 out of 10 and never a skip. Beautiful feel. Andrew.
Yeah, bro, I always loved this song too. This album's a great cruising album. If you're going on a road trip, it's fantastic, and you can sing along with the la la la's, and I've done that with a lot of people who can't sing for shit, and you just say la la la, and they go la la la, so. And the word, you can just back it up. It's just great. Easy to play on an acoustic guitar. You get the chords. Fantastic, Simon. We can all play it. It's just a brilliant song. I'm glad you mentioned it heralds the hippie kind of free love kind of movement. And it certainly does, doesn't it? Because, John Lennon goes on the record, quite proudly saying the word is love on a lot of interviews. He was always mindful of making sure that people at least understood where some of his songs were coming from, Simon. And other times he was quite interested to tell people to go and just work it out yourself. But clearly the word is love on this track. You mentioned it before at the start, bro. This is the Marijuana album, isn't it? You know, and the Beatles talk about this. Paul McCartney talks about it a lot of times. So they would sneak off to the toilet, you know, and sneak off upstairs and come down and giggling and smiling and, you know, in the radio, in the studio and offering an interpretation of what they were listening to. And I think that's probably the key. I'm not suggesting that people go out and take drugs and go and listen to the music, but I think certainly when we look at and maybe we should save that for the conclusion, maybe, but the influence of things other than scotch and whiskey and booze and cups of tea is on a couple of other albums, and then obviously they get the Get Back sessions where you and I are watching that together. Remember, guys, and all they're doing is drinking tea, aren't they, on the Get Back sessions? So interesting. Interesting.
Ringo.
I always loved the song because it was pre-hippie, you know. And again, the Beatles had a sniff for what was coming up, Simon. That, you know, they knew they had a sniff for it, didn't they?
Yeah.
Oh, look. Good morning, John ZD351.
Oh,
Hope you're good. Nice to see you, John.
Let's end the show. Let's end the show now.
I've actually heard this album.
Let's call it quits now. Let's call it quits.
Yeah. Good idea.
Brad, I tossed and turned a couple of scores on this over the last week. I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10, bro. 9 out of 10. But it's never a skip, bro. Hey, John.
Simon.
Family dinner.
Has it got piano on it?
Hey,
yes.
John skipped us for a family dinner.
Oh, come on, man.
Good work, John. Yes, well done.
Also, I just noticed Hobo Roadie, this one doesn't have any fuzz bass on it. It's the previous track. This one's just solid bass.
Not that one. So yeah, it is really interesting that Andrew, you picked up. I mean, I picked up on that as well. That is very much precursor, you know, pointing the way to the summer of love, isn't it? You know, it's what's the word? Love. You know, and being way ahead of the game as the Beatles were. You know, but again, I think that it's, you know, it's expanding their horizons. It's another piece of proof that expanding their horizons in songwriting territory and being a little more existential about it. But again, you know, all the Beatles elements are there, aren't they? In terms of it's, you know, the harmonies, that guitar that sounds like Taxman, doesn't it? It's got ding, ding, kind of that is very, very George Harrison on this record, isn't it? He does it quite a lot. That kind of that stabbing kind of Taxman chords. Everyone knows Taxman, so it's a good reference point. You know, also falsetto harmony as well. That's really cool. Great Vanzini, how are you? Good to see you, man. I'm looking forward to your PRS review. Great Vanzini. I should catch up on that later. But really good to see you. Hope you're well. Fantastic. So yeah, you know, it's and is there a harmonica at the end? Is there a little harmonica blast at the end? Or have I imagined that as well?
No,
maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe I'm imagining it. But,
it's a harmonium played by George.
The harmonium, is it? Ah. Yeah. So the first bit, harmon, is all the correct bit. The Ica bit is not quite. But, yeah. But again, I'm giving this a 10 out of 10. Yeah, the blowy thing. Pumping, lots of pumping, lot of foot act.
Pumping. Oh.
I shouldn't have said that.
Family show. Family show.
I've got anything. Stop. What is a harmonium? Like this. I'll get a picture of it, Holly, in a second when I finished it. But 10 out of 10 for me, never skip. I think this is, again, a fantastic song and a fantastic example of where the Beatles were were taken on this record, and a fantastic example of their prescience in terms of what's coming up, where the world is turning to in this particular period. So I'm giving it a 10.
Beautiful. Yeah. No time out for you, Simon.
9s indeed.
Yeah,
you're right, Holly.
Just saying.
A measly 9. A measly 9. Have a go at me, and then you give a 9. No. What's that about?
Swanning about with a 9. Dear me.
All right, guys. So we get to the last track of side A, which is a lovely song called Michelle. There's some absolutely amazing melody and harmonies in this song. I believe this song originates back to the late 50s with McCartney, and one of the few tracks that they sort of incarnated from old ideas. And a new middle age section was added by John Lennon. It's a very simple timekeeping there from Ringo. Actually sounds fantastic what he's doing, though. The French phrases accentuate a language barrier in a doomed relationship. Has a very sentimental French sort of cabaret feel. The bass from Paul is very minimalistic but perfect for the song. Has some lovely guitars that are layered in the recording, and a very lovely guitar solo by Harrison, I believe. Unless I'm incorrect there, I believe it's George Harrison that plays the guitar there, the solo. And I think it's a lovely song and a great way to end side A. And I gave it a 9.5 out of 10 and never a skip.
Just
Andrew.
Holly, that's a harmonium. It's quite a big one. See the foot pumps at the bottom. You pump it with your feet to keep it blowing, and then there's a kind of desk version there where you can pump it at the back and play the keyboards. Right, there we go. The rock professor is on it. What were the harmonium type things the nuns used? Yes, great Mazzini. That's one way of describing it. Ah, dear. So, are you? Is it your turn, Mr. Bolton?
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes, it is.
I don't know if he's put himself in timeout or whether he's.
Oh, okay. All right. No. Okay. He gave us a score, so that's fine. Yeah. Look, when I first heard this track, and what was interesting, Simon, is that this is included on the one of the, I think, on the Red albums. I think it's on the Red album. It's not on the Blue album. And yeah, and I used to always skip it. I always used to skip it, and then when I got the album, Rubber Soul, and listened to it, I tended to early on skip it, and it wasn't until a little bit later on where I started appreciating it for what it was. And obviously it's the harmonic depth of the song that kind of is interesting, isn't it? It's one of those interesting songs that Paul McCartney wrote, and I'm glad that Brad mentioned that it has an early kind of birth or an idea in McCartney's mind, and that goes back to his desire, from what I've read, to always be sort of interested in doing a lot of those kind of, show songs. He was brought up in a lot of those big band kind of show songs with his dad, and so he was always sort of interested in that. So this is where I sort of kind of back you up with, he was interested in listening to something else, whereas the other Beatles were more interested in listening to what Bob Dylan was doing. So this is probably evidence of that argument, and if you're watching and you disagree with us, please do. Love the bass on this, Brad. That last bass line flourish at the end is just fantastic. That's worth half a dozen points. So that, I'm telling you where I'm going with the score on this.
So without that, you're going to give it a 5.
Yeah. Hey, KMX Rocks. Good to see you, bro. What was interesting about this song too, when I was doing some research, is apparently it was scheduled to be the first single on the album, which is interesting. I hadn't picked that up in anything that I've read before. So if this is a theory that's not true, please let us know. But apparently John Lennon stopped it because of his jealousy, and he still had control over the band back then, Brad. So he stopped it and argued for Day Tripper to be the lead single. So if they'd had released Michelle, Michelle, that would have been off the album. Yeah, wrong one. That would have been off the album, and Day Tripper would have been on the album.
I've got a theory which I want to leave to the conclusion on the second part
about
sure.
But I said it in my header. I think they were a very strong single, AA single that came out.
Yep.
Should they have been included on this album?
Yeah.
Have a think about that. So, we'll talk about it at the conclusion next week.
Yeah, definitely. So we're just throwing that in the pot. Or would one of those songs not be ever related to the album and 12-bar original be on the album? So there's a lot to think about. But I certainly over the years, Brad, the song certainly over the years has grown on me to the point where I've got to give it a Brad score. I just think the harmonic aspect of this song is just phenomenal. I think it's again just a testament to the musicality of Sir Paul McCartney when he was 24 years old, 23 years old.
Yeah. Wow.
Remarkable.
When you put it like that, it deserves a Brad score. Yeah. Simon.
Yes. Well, the first thing I say is that if you're making an album on vinyl and you've got 7 tracks on it on side 1, what you have to do is have a pretty light acoustic track at the end because the groove's very close together, and so to get a reasonable sound out of it, it's quite difficult to have a really big, heavy track at the end of albums. So really, there's a certain element of, I think, of programming going on here, putting it at the end of side 1, which is what it is. I'm a bit like Andrew about this. I sort of still am. I understand it's a Beatles classic. It's one of those songs, isn't it? It's that it will get played forever, as an example of the Beatles and things, particularly McCartney. It's very much a McCartney song. To be honest, I would sometimes skip it. I think I've got to be a bit more in. I've heard it so much, because it's it's on. It's been on rotation in my world for 50 years, kind of thing, and so I don't, I recognise its brilliance, and I recognise what it in terms of the harmonies, the brilliant bass playing. I like the fact that it slows down a bit at 2 minutes as well. That's always cool. Great playing, and I think that the lyrics always struck me as being Michel, my belle, these are words that go together well. So it's an exercise in kind of in wordplay as much as it is anything else, and that's fine. You're finding your way through it and finding into new areas, and so that aren't quite I want to hold your hand, although there's quite a lot of I love you, I love you, I love yous in it as a thing. So for me, it's clearly a 10 out of 10 due to its position in the Beatles canon and what it is as a song. But as I say, I don't listen to it all the time. Truthfully, I would sometimes skip it still because it's kind of almost over familiar in a way, kind of thing. I know how it goes in my head. Interesting. I don't need to hear it for the 10 millionth time, which I'm not trying to do the song down. I just sometimes feel like some things that are a bit less well known, are a bit come across in a bit different way. So clearly a 10 out of 10. but I would sometimes skip it if I wasn't necessarily in the mood for it. As a song.
So I just want to back up a point that Alan's made there. So yeah, Paul McCartney's first attempt at finger picking guitar. Yeah, and in a couple of years' time, he goes and composes Blackbird, which is not an easy song to play.
Hey, at this concert that I went to,
yeah,
he got everyone to put up their hand. He said, "Put up your hand if you've tried to play Blackbird," and all these people, including me, hands up. He goes, "You're playing it wrong."
It's always a danger, isn't it? It's always the danger.
Very funny, man.
Fun show, guys. We've had a bit of fun. Obviously, this is part 1, done and dusted. We're going to be back next week with part 2, and then we're going to have a conclusion. So if you want to contribute to the theories of the conclusion, you're more than welcome to join us. If you've got some conclusion points that you want to make in the chat here, on the comments after the show is up on our YouTube channel, even better, and we'll come back to them. There's always a conversation and controversy around the Beatles, for good and for bad. But one thing I've noticed, though, Brad and Simon, over the years of following Beatles and Beatles channels on YouTube, it's always respectful. It's never nasty. People don't call you names, except for when it comes to a conversation about Ono and Lennon. That's the only time I see people going nuts.
Bit different to the Van Halen world, isn't it?
Big difference, bro.
Stop that now.
I mean that.
Brad, how about this? Brad, stop talking about that. We're talking about the greatest band in the world ever, okay?
Hey, you know what? I've said it on the 5150 show, like when we've done ranking tracks on the Van Halen albums, Andrew, as you remember, and I've said Beatles harmonies, Beatles melody, Beatles, I hear it all over their music. So, yeah.
Interesting that you should say that about the Beatles. So there is a Rolling Stones connection here, and you can hear it on the Anthology song. Oh, it's one of the songs on Anthology where Paul McCartney talks about Plastic Soul, and apparently they got that from Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger was made a reference. Yep. And that, again, goes back to these black blues dudes, and that's one of the reference points that they made, Simon, if somebody was playing the blues and they didn't have it. They had Plastic Soul.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, because, and clearly, this is, by some distance, not, it contains, we can get into this a bit, but it contains some kind of, rock and roll, rockabilly influences, but it doesn't really contain any blues stuff, does it? I mean, the structure of the songs is not really bluesy. The solos not hugely bluesy. They're kind of different stuff.
No, it doesn't. But there is a blues connection. Yeah,
indeed.
With
yeah.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
It is one of the interesting differences between the Stones and the Beatles, isn't it? And the Beatles had a kind of rockabilly influence, and the Stones took that kind of blues thing, and and the divergence of it. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, we did pretty well. I think we just skimmed in over 2 hours 10 minutes on 7 tracks.
We're not going to do a group shout out. I mean, an individual shout out, folks. We're just going to say, look, Brad did a shout out at the start. We're gonna say goodbye because I got a dog here screaming, and Brad's got a boy to feed, and the Rock Professor's got some gin to go and do.
He's got more to do than just gin.
Gin to put on my cornflakes. This is 8:23 a.m.
I heard Simon, you put more than just gin on your cornflakes, mate. Some white stuff.
Oh yeah. What powdered rhino horn?
All right.
We'll be back same time next week with part 2. Brad, thank you for the intro. Rock Professor, thank you for your contributions. And everybody in the chat, thank you. We'll see you next week. Oh, breaking news too. Our Christmas show. Make sure you hit the notification button because I'm going to put the Christmas show time up on the channel after this show.
And if you want to subscribed, make sure you subscribe.
Yeah. So you can get that notification, and then if you want to come on our Christmas show, let us know.
Beautiful.
Can we do the stat that every other channel does, which is 62% of the people who watch this channel are not subscribed?
No, we're not about stats.
I don't know where they get that stat from.
One of my favourite things. Everybody does it. Yes, I've noticed looking through the stats that 42%.
What? Why don't you just say subscribe?
Subscribe, dude. Subscribe.
We out here?
Let's go, guys.
Yeah. Okay.
Take care, all in the chat. See you next week.
Boy.
Have a good week.
Bye. Bye.